Welcome to Good News, Good Life. My name is Anthony Benitez, a public theological writer calling the church back to grace. Here I explore Reformation thought, freedom from the law, and the end of accusation. You can read more at my substack, which is at Anthony Benitez or at Anthony Ben, where I publish essays on covenant, conscience, and the finished work of Christ. Let us begin. Today I want to touch on something very foundational and pull it back just a bit. We have been teaching on some of the most radical, transformational doctrines the last couple of days or weeks, I would say. But today I want to just ask a rhetorical question for those who are new to our podcast. If you are here from Substack, I want to give you a very warm welcome. I appreciate it. And if you are here maybe from a referral or whatever it may be, or word of mouth, welcome as well. So for all of those who do not know, we have been live streaming through podcast for maybe about 5 years now. And it's been a wonderful journey, and what we focus on here is a couple of things, and that's what I really want to touch on. What is this podcast all about? What is Christianity all about? Because ultimately this podcast is, in essence, trying, like I mentioned, to call the church back to grace. Calling the church back to the foundation, which is Christ, the cornerstone. Now, what do I mean by calling the church back to grace? And what do I mean by calling the church back to Christ? So if I say that I'm calling the church back to grace, then by default I am insinuating that the church has fallen from grace, right? If I'm saying I'm calling the church back to grace, then my insinuation is very clearly that the church has fallen from grace. And if I am saying that I am here on this podcast to call the church back to the cornerstone, which is Christ, then I am inevitably saying that the church is not being built on the foundation, the rock, but rather on sand. Now, what I mean by the church, first of all, I am pro-church. I am pro-church. You need to be plugged into a community, a church that is full of believers. I am not anti-church. I am, however, anti-heresy. And we must understand the difference. So when I say in this podcast, this is what we're about here. We preach on the true doctrine of grace. Grace has been watered down, corrupted, and mixed with works, so much so that if you were to read Martin Luther, Zwingli, John Calvin, any of these folks who initiated the Protestant Reformation, you would say these people have lost their minds. These people have lost their minds by saying that the Mosaic law is done away with. Because in modern Christianity, we reverence the Mosaic law, and we incorporate it into the New Testament as if Christ did not put it away on the cross. So my simple mission is this, is when we read the Bible, when we read the church fathers, when we read the Protestant Reformation initiators, we have to compare what they were teaching for 1900 years and what we are teaching today in the modern church. Martin Luther and the reformers did not want to break away from the church. They wanted to reform the church. That's why they were called reformers. To reform something is to keep the structure, but we need to do some major renovations here. We need to make some corrections and changes, but not do away with the church. So Martin Luther and the Protestants, they did not want to break away from the church. The reformers did not want to break away from the church, but the church excommunicated them for preaching the undefiled gospel of grace. So we are pro-church here in this podcast. We are pro-grace here. We explain what grace means. True grace, not universalism, not anarchy, not anti-moralism, but we really begin to read the patristic era, the church fathers. We read the epistles, the scriptures. We read Martin Luther and John Calvin and the reformers. We study to show ourselves approved, like 2 Timothy declares. So really, what are we about in this podcast? So we are calling the church back to grace and not to this novel idea of grace. This isn't novelty. What does that mean? Novelty means new, means fresh. This is something new. This is not new. This is not novel. This is actually antiquated. This is antiques. This is the way it was since the beginning. This is actually what the church preached on for the last 1900 years. This entire modern, and I say probably Americanized modern church is actually a deviation from the 1900 years of church history. Did you know that? Did you know that this modern church era is actually a deviation from the 1900 years of church history? What did they teach on? Well, the gospel of grace, the gospel of the cross, of suffering, the gospel of suffering, the crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, glorification of Christ, the foundations of Christianity, justification by faith, righteousness that is imputed to you, the finished work of Christ, and what does that mean for you? How to rest in the finished work of Jesus Christ. This is church history, rich for the last 1900 years. So this is why, if you found me on Substack and if you've been listening to us, you've noticed my specific emphasis on church history, on the patristic church age, the reformers, the core tenets of Christianity. John Knox. What did John Knox teach on? Predestination, election by grace, salvation by grace, purification by grace, sanctification by grace, living in the Spirit, flowing in the Spirit, finish the finished work of Jesus and resting in his finished work. Purification by fire, baptism by fire, which is the doctrine of the cross. Take up your cross and follow me. The black pill that the majority of a Christian's life, depending on the maturity and the strength that is pointed to that person, is not necessarily a life of victory. Victory is actually cross. cross. That's 1900 years rich, steeped in church history. This victory, 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 prosperity, 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 faith, 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 worship, 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 worship. Find the good in you, and you, and you, and you, and you. You can do it, do it, do it, do it. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. All this is actually a deviation from church history. And my simple mission is that of not saying anything new. My goal here, and this is my point for today's episode, is very simple. My goal is to bring you my mission statement. My goal is simply to reiterate with a fresh voice in the 21st century, to reiterate what John Calvin was preaching, to reiterate what Martin Luther was preaching, to reiterate what Zwingli was preaching, to reiterate what Paul the Apostle was preaching, to reiterate what the apostles were preaching, to reiterate the gospel, to reiterate the last 1900 years of church history. And that in of itself is radical. It's radical in an age, in an epoch, where modernity has crept into the church. Preaching suffering and taking up your cross is radical in American culture. Preaching that dogma is important, is radical in a culture that is obsessed with worship rather than doctrine. You should be obsessed with doctrine more than being obsessed with soaking in His presence. You should be obsessed with understanding what Jesus did for you instead of being obsessed with praying and fasting. Hello. You should be obsessed, my friend, with understanding what justification by faith really means and the nuances of it instead of being obsessed with soul winning. You should be obsessed with learning how to walk and having a relationship with Jesus instead of being obsessed with self-improvement, spiritually speaking, trying to defeat sin all the time. Well, understand what actually happened on the cross. Well, first of all, what is sin? And what does that mean? What happened on the cross? Was sin nailed on the cross? Did Jesus take your sin? Well, if He took it, that means you don't have it. Now, the working out of that is what we talk about. We don't preach sinless perfection, by the way. We don't. But all these subjects is an overview of what we teach on in this specific podcast. And if you're tired of simple, superficial, trite subjects being talked about in church, if you're tired of just superficial conversations about, what does it mean that Goliath is your water bill and you are David, and that bill came out of nowhere, but God is going to help you through. It's like, if you're tired of all these just superficial, Americanized, Western, modern fluff, and you want some more meat, if you want some more depth, if you want true spiritual meat, if you want true water, then come and drink and come and eat in this podcast. And what we preach on is not anything new. It is what the church has taught for the last 1900 years. It's not new. This new church modern era, that's a deviation from the last 1900 years. What we teach on is tried, true, and tested by the holy fire, by the holy scriptures, by the last 1900 years. It's not new what we preach on here. It's new to us, but it's not new. So that's what we teach on in this podcast. And if you're interested, then continue to listen. We publish 2 or 3 times a week. Subscribe on Spotify. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And if you're not subscribed to my Substack, I do encourage you to subscribe to my Substack at Anthony Benitez. You can find me there and subscribe. I release essays, articles, notes, paragraphs, reflections, devotionals, very nice church imagery, subscribe and get plugged into a community. We have a very rapidly growing community on Substack, and I go live on there also, by the way. I go live on there, so if you're not on Substack, subscribe to my Substack. And if you are on Substack, then come back and listen for more of these teachings on Spotify, on Apple, on a weekly basis. So once again, my name is Anthony Benitez. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode. I hope you're encouraged by it. If you believe in what we're doing and want to help us continue spreading the word about our gracious and loving Savior, consider supporting our podcast. Your contribution, whether it's a one-time gift or becoming a monthly partner, goes directly towards our media and our video production efforts. Together, we can continue to share the good news to those that need it the most. Visit our website to give today, and thank you for your generosity.